Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Sunday afternoon author event here in the virtual Princeton Public Library. My name is Janie Herman, and I am so pleased to welcome you here to this talk this afternoon. And before we get started, I am just going to do a few housekeeping items. Number one is that right now the chat is open. Feel free to chat in there while we get the introductions going, but I will close it down for the main presentation and open it up at the end during the Q&A. Speaking of Q&A, there is an Ask a Question function at the bottom of the screen, and you can put your questions in there at any time so that they can be asked, and you can upvote and see what everybody else has asked so that we know what questions that we should focus on. If you're having any difficulties, just stick it in the chat right now, or you can also go where it says Get Audio Video Help at the bottom on the left-hand side, right near the End Broadcast button. Oh, maybe you don't see that button. Right near underneath the Live button is what I should have said. You can also purchase The Perfect Fascist from bookshop.org. Normally we partner with Labyrinth's Books, but they were having a busy weekend. Bookshop.org, if you're not familiar with it, does support local and independent bookstores, which is one of our goals through our readings here at the library, is to support the local and independent bookstores that need our help so much right now. So this is a special event. We're doing it on a Sunday afternoon because both of our guest speakers are in Italy, and so an afternoon event was needed instead of an evening event, and even for them it's getting into later at night, towards 9 o'clock at night, and so we thank them for coming and joining us here. So we're here to speak about The Perfect Fascist, and I'm going to first introduce Professor Victoria de Grazia, who is the Moore Collegiate Professor of History at Columbia University. Born in Chicago, she grew up crisscrossing the USA until her family settled in Princeton, New Jersey. So she does have a great Princeton connection. She is now a dual US-Italian citizen, and she splits her time between New York City and Sartiano in the province of Siena. She received her undergraduate education at Smith College before going on to do advanced studies in history at the University of Florence, and was awarded her PhD with distinction from Columbia. She taught at Rutgers and then Lehman College before joining the Columbia History Department in 1994. Professor de Grazia is a founding member of the Radical History Review Collective, and she has served on the board of editors of numerous professional journals. Her intellectual and scholarly interests lie in the study of power, specifically the intersection of force and persuasion, or hard and soft power, and how these mesh differently under liberal and authoritarian systems of rule. And as I said earlier, today we're here to discuss her most recent book from Harvard Press, The Perfect Fascist, A Story of Love, Power, and Morality in Mussolini's Italy. And she is joined by Jenny McPhee, who also has a very good Princeton connection, as I'm sure many of you are aware. And Jenny McPhee is the author of The Center of Things, No Ordinary Matter, A Man of No Moon, and she's also the co-author, along with her sisters, of Girls, Ordinary Girls and Their Extraordinary Pursuits. Her translations from Italian include books by the authors Natalia Ginsburg, Primo Levi, Anna Maria Ortiz, Pope John Paul II, and many others. Her articles, stories, and translations have been published in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Book Forum, Glimmer Train, among others. She is the academic director of the Center of Applied Liberal Arts at NYU School of Professional Studies, and she also co-founded the Bronx Academy of Letters, a New York City public school, in 2003. So that's just a brief overview of our two distinguished guests who I am now going to bring up onto stage. So welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
And hang on a minute, and welcome, Jenny. And let me get myself out of this picture here. Let me bring you up. Okay, welcome, Victoria. And whoopsie, welcome, Jenny. There we go. We are all here now. I'm going to close that out. Okay, so take it away. I'm going to go hide, and I'm going to get the slides up that we're going to be using. And I'm so pleased that you're both here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Janie, and hello, Vicki. Thanks, Janie and Emma, for organizing this really wonderful event. I'm always so happy to come to Princeton Public Library, which was really a second home to me as a bookish girl growing up in Princeton. And one silver lining of COVID is that I can come virtually to the library whenever I want, from wherever I am. Both Vicki and I happen to be in Italy, as Janie mentioned. And at the moment, the vineyards, which are oblivious to COVID, are full of are just in their full autumn extravaganza. I'm going to make you all jealous. The leaves are just dazzling variations of ochre and saffron and amber and vermilion, and the olive harvest is in full swing. So it seems very serendipitous and fitting that both Vicky and I are here in Italia talking about her wonderful and important new book. So first, I just want to congratulate Vicky on such an extraordinary achievement in your new book, which brings together in full force all of your interests and obsessions with how to do and tell history. The Perfect Fascist, though seemingly about one man, Attilio Teruzzi, an Italian army officer who became a commander of the Black Shirts and a colonial administrator under Mussolini, is really a social history of power, morality, and gender, revealing the inner workings of Italian fascism, and brilliantly describes the rise and fall of Mussolini. As she always has done so expertly in all of her books, Vicky looks at the micro, the details, the particular, the personal, to show us how the forces of history shape who we are and how we in turn shape history. Furthermore, this book is so beautifully written, indeed novelistic, gripping from start to finish. It certainly is worthy of Henry James. And at times one feels when reading Vicky's book that we've somehow landed in one of James's Italian stories, especially when the book focuses on Teruzzi's marriage. His wife, the intrepid and persistent Jewish-American opera singer Liliana Weinman. The story of their marriage and its torturous dissolution is seamlessly interwoven with Teruzzi's rise and fall in the fascist government. Indeed, the book opens with a stunning description of Attilio and Liliana's sumptuous fascist wedding. The book also includes gorgeous photographs, some of which you will see, and terrific maps. I love maps, they're just gorgeous. And sadly, but significantly, A Perfect Fascist couldn't be more timely. This story, this history is so very relevant to our times and speaking to us about where we are now and who we are now on every page. But before I go on, I'd like to share with you the format of our discussion this afternoon for you, this evening for us. Vicky will do three very short readings to give you a flavor of the book, and I will ask her a few questions in between, and then we'll open up the discussion to you. And you can put your questions, as Jamie said, in the chat. So one of the central questions of Vicky's book is, how is a fascist made? How does, and I quote, the little guy from Porta Genova, the rough-mannered colonial soldier, angry apparatchik, rise in the fascist ranks to become one of Mussolini's inner circle and leading hierarchs? Furthermore, as our own elections loom under very disturbing circumstances, I did find it astonishing and scary, which was described so well by Vicky, that the elections in Italy in 1924 was the last free vote there until 1946. So after the elections of 1924, liberal democracy was over, despite the fact that most Italians saw parliamentary politics as a desirable form of government. And yet the first thing the fascists did as an elected minority was to undermine and disrupt enshrined conventions. I urge you to read Vicky's book to get the entire nuanced and gripping account. But Vicky, can you give us a little taster of how this happened? and then that will lead into the first reading.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a mixture of serendipity that I was given the Women's Archive. And in the archive, I was able to, in fact, get behind the facade of totalitarian life. In other words, I was allowed into this private life, of a misbegotten marriage. And that then pushed me to want to find out more, to find out and to see that a marriage, and particularly a bad marriage, can show one a huge amount about how a society works, especially a society which, because of the nature of fascist rule, kept messing the lines between the private and the public, was injecting huge amounts of passion, wrong types of passion into the public sphere, and then using the public sphere to, in effect, to torment both its its leading men, and to make life very, very difficult, and more generally for practically everybody. So what I wanted to begin to understand is how this man became a fascist. From this first slide, okay, if you could show it to us, and then we'll move on. Sure, Janie can. Janie, are you showing us? Can you move one, Janie? The next slide. Okay, just let's go very, very, very briefly. So what struck me, looking in the archive, the first thing is to see Mussolini, who was the best man. This is the protagonist, Liliana, a very, very ambitious young rising opera star, and here is the husband. So immediately a very complicated setup in which Mussolini is the best man. So it's sort of a marriage à trois with his follower, the family here, the mother and father, Tullio Serafin, who is the conductor of the Met at the time, who was her mentor, and the American ambassador, which made it a kind of love affair between America and Italy, a perfect fascist wedding, and there the very difficult mother, her mother-in-law and sister. So we're already here, a double marriage, which involves the Catholic Church, in a country where there's no divorce, and a civil marriage to signal that now a woman of great talent, an American, was marrying a fascist new man, this sort of virile new man, which was the great extraordinary image of fascism in the early 1920s. Let me turn it back to. So the big question was, how did this man, okay, a good soldier, become a fascist? Can we have the next slide? Okay. Good soldier still, who was aide-de-camp to a very important general during World War I. He got 2 silver medals. He was the best and the bravest, leaving the army in 1920 as a major. Can we see one more slide? And here we see him in 1921, actually 1922, mounting a coup d'etat against the city of Milan. This is 3 months before the March on Rome. And you can see him here in this black shirt with his medals. And that's where I wanted to come in and speak to that. Because in 1920, he was just a veteran coming home and very, very distressed. With no obvious prospects, Major Teruzzi took life one day at a time, living at home with his mother in his old neighborhood. He got up, hung around, ate his mother's cooking, put on his uniform to show that he was still an officer under arms, and took the tram to the Duomo. Chances are that in the nearby Galleria, he would find friends and old acquaintances. And that was where his friend, the librettist for Puccini, Guelfo Civinini, captured him one day, September afternoon, a scene that Civinini rendered in his librettist style when he wrote it up years later as a tenor role. There was the usual raggedly attired young war veterans standing around sullen-faced and silent as if waiting orders, when suddenly a figure pushed out from the shadows to open Act 1, Scene 1 of Italy's national redemption. Strong and handsome, Civinini recalled, pacing back and forth with a fearsome leather kerbash, a rhinoceros whip from the colonies, gripped in one hand and nervously tugging at his beard. As the two men embraced, Teruzzi pulled back, repatriated, and this was the Italy he had found on his return. His buddies told him to wear civilian clothes, to leave his uniform at home, not to show off his decorations. What the hell have they done to our country, Teruzzi implored, his voice choking back a sob, to hear us told we couldn't provoke these bastards with our war medals. He brought down his whip with a great crack. So we're coming to this, how revolting. Jolted by the ferocity of the whip, the passerbys who had stopped to gawk scattered. If you were a benevolent observer, rather than the butt of his anger, you might have felt some sympathy at the sight of his big hands clenched, his arms filling around as he hopped right foot then left, shouting and cursing. After all, the poor guy had some good reasons to protest. Even buttoned-up bourgeois men sympathized once they realized he was an officer of the king and a Milanese, not a derelict or some histrionic Neapolitan. Women easily succumbed to the vulnerability of a man who so openly bared his emotions. Now, if we go just a year later, the first big elections, I should say the second elections, which take place May 15th, 1921, where the old master worker of Italian politics is trying to bring in the fascists as part of his national bloc, okay, to tame them. This is the whole idea now. He will rework them. So Giolitti, a little like an old-style Republican, think of him that way. This was Mussolini's first bid to enter electoral politics since his devastating November 1919 defeat. The Milan Fascio was running a lurid and violent political campaign against the left. Blood-red flyers showed bourgeois women being blown to bits under the slogan, "The Diana Theater, never forget," an anarchist bombing that had been there. "For the love and salvation of the nation, vote for the Fasci of Combattimento's list," read another. On May 40,000 people showed up at Piazza del Gioioso, promising to lead one leader called the healthy majority of the nation. By this he meant the great swath of medium-sized entrepreneurs, veterans, the moral, intellectual, and technical elite, as distinct from the coalition of plutocrats and deserters, backed by anarcho-Bolshevik gangsterism. Mussolini brought the crowd to a screaming pitch when he urged the fascisti, as they embarked on the work of rebuilding, to be both revolutionary and implacably reactionary. From the newspaper accounts, we can see now Major Teruzzi, as he was still called, at work. On May 6th, he allegedly instigated a shootout after being heckled at a campaign rally in Serragno, an industrial town of 15,000, 20 miles north of Milan. From what we could piece together from the different newspapers, he had escorted 3 national bloc candidates to the gathering at the town center. It was late afternoon. Nobody had organized a conventional rebuttal time because the socialists had boycotted the rally, and the central square was filled mainly with women, kids, and a few pensioners. The speakers went on for 2 hours, interrupted by heckling, and at one point, some prankster paraded a dwarf in front of a window above the balcony where the speakers were standing, to the great hilarity of the crowd. When Teruzzi turned to speak at the end, the clamor rose. Now here the accounts diverge. The socialist paper has one view, the fascists clearly had another. Avanti reported that Teruzzi shouted, "Stop the obstructionism or you will all be exterminated." And when the kids hooted, he pulled out his gun, yelled, "To us," and fired a shot, at which point 2 truckloads of fascists pitched into the crowd, leaving a 56-year-old carpenter dead and several people, including a policeman, wounded. The Corriere, that's the liberal paper, said that the melee had been caused when the crowd broke out singing Bandiera Rossa, and the fascists had stepped in to restore order. Okay. The election at that time was just 10 days away, and Mussolini would organize an enormous victory, and that would be the beginning of his entry into Parliament and his destruction thereafter of Parliament.
Wow, really sobering stuff. Very, very gorgeously written, though. Wow. So my next question, Vicky, is about Liliana Weinman, who was the opera diva known as Liliana Lorma, who left New York City in a promising career at the Metropolitan Opera to go to Milan to improve her Italian diction and to get some experience on the stage at La Scala. So she meets this Teruzzi, this older man who was, I think he was 10 years older than she was. Anyway, older and not her equal in wealth or social status. And he's a hopeless womanizer and a particularly violent type who was responsible early on for the fascist squad. So, dear reader, she married him. What was she thinking? So Vicky, can you explain this to us? And I think then that will segue into the next reading as well.
Yes. Well, Liliana wanted to be a star on the stage, and she saw a parallel with being star in the piazza. And from the get-go, she was struck by the fascists as representing what they did other bourgeois of Milan. That is, they were people who were for law and order. So she didn't see them creating the disorder. She only saw them speaking about bringing back order. And that was very much part of how she viewed the world. And she saw too a parallel between her movement through the Galleria, she lived there nearby, and the fascists who would come through with their chest decorated with medals. So there was a kind of parallel between the two.
And all their pomp and operatic performance. They were very performative.
Totally. Aida-like behavior with horses and, you know, the decorations but I think what's important is that this is a man who was also a soldier and gentleman when he wanted to be. So it was like this double face, and he certainly didn't show to her the side that had him as a squadrista. That was part of his past. These were men now who were settling down. And she believed in making coup. She was going to have a coup, a Napoleonic moment, and that would bring her back to the Met. And so she responded to his golpismo in his courtship. So this was something in late October 1925, on the 3rd anniversary of the March on Rome, Teruzzi took his courtship public. It was the biggest celebration of the regime yet. It was after the Matteotti crisis, when the socialist deputy Matteotti had been assassinated, and Mussolini, by hook or crook, also thanks to the loyalty of men like Teruzzi, managed to restart his regime and then declare the dictatorship. So the Duce was in his political hometown, Milan, for several days of festivities. The kickoff on October 28th was an early morning review of 35,000 fascist militiamen at Sempione Park, and the festivities culminated that evening at the Duomo with trumpets and fanfares, a band concert of patriotic music, and a flyover of an air squadron exploding red, white, and green fireworks over the cathedral spires. The event of real significance took place at La Scala that afternoon. Mussolini couldn't bluff when he took the stage to speak. The Milanese industrialists wanted an accounting, facts, a clear plan. He couldn't bluster. Fascism now meant, he said, all in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against that state. Toward that end, in only 3 years, Mussolini's government had issued 3,000 directives. There were so many problems still afoot. The economic recession was only one for his regime to endure. Every day was hard work, every day another step. The public at La Scala greeted the speech with rapture, exclaiming, "Duce, Duce," and the cheers and applause lasted until everybody was exhausted. This was where Teruzzi then was courting Liliana. Paparazzi captured the Duce in profile, beaming from his open car as he introduced Liliana. Was introduced to Liliana in her fox trim coat and clasping a bouquet of long-stemmed roses. Rose's matronly figure found its way into the camera's eye, too, as she watched the Duce address the crowd from her place on a dais beside the mayor of Milan, her face lit up by an ecstatic smile. The Wyman woman, mother and daughter, had been swept away. "Darling is Popsy," Rose wrote to her husband on October 31st, 1925. "Now you must excuse me for not writing this week. I know I did wrong, but I could not help it. It just happened that way. Teruzzi was here all week and was in and out all the time." Liliana added, we had such a thrilling week that we neglected you, you poor darling. We saw Teruzzi on an average of 4 times a day, and when he wasn't here, he was telephoning." Well, you can imagine the reaction of the father. The father was like a Rigoletto, faced with his daughter Gilda being stolen away, seduced by the Duke of Modena. He agonizes until Liliana's birthday, November 16th, when he delivered a soliloquy that was as hapless and heart-wrenching as the hunchbacks on discovering that the Duke of Modena had seduced his sweet Gilda. Volumes of book I could dictate to a writer for either way. Isaac opened his birthday letter. "Then, my child, my heart, do what your heart dictates to you." And her heart dictated that she succumb to this fascist. At the same time, she said she was doing it for purposes of idealism, that he needed ballast, that she had ballast, that somehow she could reconcile her career with entering into Mussolini's inner circle. That was her ambition with him. And it was a kind of New York City idea, that ambitious idea that this power couple, this man and this big woman with her wealth, would now be able to enter in. And that way, both of them, patriots, would be doing service to Italy and to fascism.
So then 3 years later, the marriage falls apart. And then it's just an extraordinary story of resistance on her part after that. Can you talk a little bit about how that happens? The whole court case and the divorce, and that she couldn't, she wouldn't divorce him, and her resistance, and how that functioned in the story.
So it was a very peculiar place in the West because it's the center of Holy Roman Catholic Church. There was no divorce by a kind of constitutional fluke. Italy, once it was unified, they hadn't gotten around to making a new divorce law. So Mussolini, making an accord with the church, basically said, the church asked for it, that there be no divorce, and the church would be then responsible for allowing for the annulment of marriages only in the church courts. So when this marriage dissolves, and in that lies a kind of Otello story, in which fascist Iagos show him purloined letters and so on and so forth. It's a very strange story, which says a lot about the melodrama of life under Italian fascism. There is no divorce. She doesn't want a divorce, so she fights through the church courts, and the church courts are run like an inquisition, which is to say there's no torture, but they're inquiring, they're trying to find every aspect of what the marriage was to be able to pass on it. So it's a fairly long, very, very long, very creepy, because in the sense that for us, the idea that priests who are celibate should be inquiring into every single detail, carnal and otherwise, of the intimacy of a marriage to find out whether it's a true marriage and therefore should be preserved, or had never actually been contracted properly. It is indeed takes one into this other world. And that's a strange thing here, that a marriage would take you in places that even the fascist state could not imagine. We're there to exercise its powers, and the church's power is kind of making its way everywhere in this time of counter-reformation as well as reaction. And the fact that we're trying to stop it from going into these recondite places. And Liliana, being American, wealthy, and very smart with a very good legal mind, she manages to find the most extraordinary range of support. And likewise, Teruzzi, since he's a very high figure in the regime, he too is finding support. So we've got the most amazing set of divorce lawyers on one side, the Pope's Pius XII's nephews, Pacelli, his lawyers, her lawyer is the head of the Catholic Church Party, old head, and so on. It
was really interesting to me. Incredible clash of church and state through this marriage. And, I was just surprised that he was pretty high up in the fascist regime, and yet he wasn't able to get the annulment. And she was Jewish too, so you would think that the powers that be would have made that happen, but it didn't. So it was also the Vatican not wanting to get into the fascists, or I didn't. Tell me more.
Back and forth, because I think there's so in that kind of regime, there's this sort of both the church and the regime are creating these deep states where they fight, even where they fight each other. And Teruzzi, he's always this element of it. I mean, he's histrionic. He's a little man, and I suppose the church probably figures out, we can maybe screw him by not granting this marriage, and that way we'll send a message to others who are more anti-clerical and who are his friends and bothering us. And then he, on the other hand, is getting more and more support. So when the Jewish laws are passed, there is a moment when the local church court is forced to accept, to dissolve a marriage, saying that only Catholics believed in true marriage, whereas Jews and Americans, because they had the culture of divorce, didn't really believe in marriage. Now, that is an argument that's used more recently to legitimate Catholic marriages. Not that Jews and Americans, but that somebody had a doubt. I'm not really marrying. I don't believe in it. But it did show very early that there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and the church was less interested in protecting her as a Jew than protecting the sacred nature of marriage. I mean, that's
Right.
the Catholic Church had to protect a Jew in order to do that at that time. That was fine. That.
Another really interesting thing, though, is Teruzzi then goes and takes up with another Jewish woman. I mean, do you have a thing for Jewish women, or what?
That's what I'm thinking. He said, what is going on here? What is going on here? So this is how I figured it out. First of all, Jews came in all different forms, and a man like Teruzzi who had been in the colonies, where the only available, the handsomest and most prosperous women were Jewish. In Libya, in Darna, and Benghazi, and Tripoli, there were very sizable communities of emancipated, cultivated Jews, and so there were relations with them, and he said a Jewish girlfriend in Darna when he was the battalion major there. Merchant's daughter, probably like that. He liked cosmopolitan women. He liked big women, like his mother. He liked women with strong moral compasses. And that's so that he was probably looking more for that. And then the fascists by the 1930s were, when they finally got around to saying that person is Jewish and that person's Jewish and so on and so forth, he himself was making all these kinds of distinctions. There were Eastern European Jews. Oh, God forbid. They're like Liliana. They're terrible. They're terrible. They believe in the Talmud. They're horrors. They're misers or this or that. But then there's Sephardic Jews, which the second woman was not. She was Romanian, but lived in Cairo, who are very different. And then there are the Falashas in Ethiopia. Maybe we shouldn't even consider them Jews at all and not let them, they won't come under the race laws. And then there are the Libyan Jews who weren't considered to be Jews and then persecuted until 1941. So, around the Mediterranean, there was this kind of variety. So these women are falling under the realm of cosmopolitan women, more emancipated women, tough women, which did resemble his sister, who was a school teacher, and this very ferocious mother. So I kind of steered away from kind of Jean-Paul Sartre, the sort of visions of the Jew and the anti-Semite, and his Jew loving the women because they were Jewish and being part of some very strange kind of.
And however, he has a child with this, his second. He never could marry her because he was still married. But then what happens when the racial laws get serious in Italy? What happens to his?
Really, the 38. I mean, anybody who believes that Italians are not serious about their race laws has got to reread this. I mean, there are other colleagues, historians are also making this point, but the race laws make both his girlfriend, his companion, and the baby more and more Jewish, and it's a process. In 38, it's not so bad if she could get citizenship, but she can't get citizenship because it's not sure if you need a birth certificate to get the citizenship or not. A baptismal certificate. And the child, initially, she's blonde, like the grandmother, the Lombard grandmother, but he can't adopt her because the laws in Italy favor only the legal family. So he couldn't got his wife's permission, his estranged wife's permission, he couldn't adopt her. So going in, it becomes more and more dramatic about what to do with his companion, who is more and more hostile toward him as he tries take over, be more and more despotic about trying to adopt the baby, which would be illegal anyway. And that's going to end up, he's going to send her into exile, and then they're all going to end up together under German occupation, where there was huge danger to the companion, who was stateless and completely dependent on him, and this small child. So it's a kind of this crazy drama in which this man finds himself when he kept saying, all I wanted to do was just marry and settle down and have a nice family under fascism.
Right. So the Perfect Fascist really examines very brilliantly the overwhelming preoccupation with virility and the whole concept of masculinity, and the rigorous contempt for women, how that was integral to the success of fascism. And Teruzzi really represents fascism's new man. Can you speak to how this whole preoccupation with the male functioned through Teruzzi, and how that made him the perfect fascist?
Well, probably what made him so perfect was not clearly his intelligence. He was regarded as mediocre, but other qualities that had been honed while he was a military man. His loyalty to rank, his loyalty to the hierarchy, which was missing in most old fascists because they weren't part of a military tradition. And so they reinvented a sense of hierarchy, which was based on fascist ideals, and that allowed for all kinds of backbiting and corruption and self-serving. So Teruzzi, also because he was a military man, looked good. He had great posture. He was a good athlete. He had this fancy beard, which came out of military traditions, which he always kept, which was a little bit unusual. So we're building up. Loyal, great looking in a uniform, holds up pretty well over 20 years, because these men now come into power when they're in 1922, when they're 40 years old. But Mussolini, if you look at him in 1940, 1942, he's looking pretty haggard. Whereas Teruzzi, as you can see in this picture here, a night at the opera with the head of the colonial affairs, advisor of Hitler in 1940, he is, has this look. He also blue eyes, Milanese, so that adds this kind of quality. He was also the patron of young people, which added to the kind of curiosity that a very rough man should also be a patron of young people. That meant also young women, who, in exchange clearly for sexual favors, there was no, they were girlfriends or not, but sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. They were asking things for their families, for their brothers, for their fathers. It's very, very common, like in Berlusconi's Italy, surrounded by young women who, would be part of his retinue, who then he would help get them licenses to go set up shops in Addis Ababa in the colonies. The old historian Claudio Pavoni once mentioned, he mentioned some woman gallerist. He said, we always called her, said that Teruzzi had set her up, because he was very well known for this kind of patronage of women. So it was a kind of virility that isn't, just the stuffed shirt in the uniform and the jackboots, that kind. It was, if you want to, it was more complicated, especially as these men, he himself particularly, takes so much care to move up the status rank. What you should eat at meals, how you should decorate your apartment, where you should have your apartment, where you should have your house by the sea. The one problem was he didn't have a wife. And so he's compensated by surrounding himself with women friends. who were sort of family friends, by surrounding himself with these askari, the black mercenary soldiers that he brought back with him from Libya. So he would make striking presents, if you want, by this beard, which was and by the exceptional variety of uniforms, because he had various functions, both as a military man and as a fascist black head of the general in fascist black shirts, but also the colonial minister. So he was always changing uniforms according to this sort of this great range of functions that he occupied. Okay. So sort of going toward.
Yeah, so Vicki, one of the most astonishing scenes in the entire book, and there's so many, but for me, of course, I'm obsessed with Italian classic cinema. So for me, the scene on the beach with the Italian actresses, one of whom was Anna Magnani, is just incredible, right before the start of World War II. Would you read that excerpt? It's so fabulous.
This scene takes place just a couple weeks after Teruzzi could be seen with his fascist, because Mussolini concludes as a alliance with Hitler, the Axis, and when Hitler goes to war against France in June 1940, Mussolini makes the decision to join the war. So in Rome, the summer weekend starts on Friday when ushers and porters skip out of work to idle in the sun, and chauffeured cars line up at the ministries at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to drive the hierarchs to the seaside to join their families. On June 10th, 1940, Italy declared that it would go to war on the side of Germany. So the early summer of 1940 became a kind of lieu de mémoire, a point of memory. People later remembered that moment especially poignantly as the quiet before the catastrophe that would engulf the Italian peninsula in just a few months, causing the loss of empire in less than 2 years and resulting in Mussolini's ouster and execution in 3. Teruzzi was one of the great hierarchs at the time. Perhaps he was the most conspicuous of them for his attraction to the dolce vita of Cinecittà, his glamorous parties and patronage of the young, and his many public appearances. For Elsa De Giorgi, the cinema star, Teruzzi was a familiar figure. There was the gossip. She saw him at celebrity events, and he was a good friend to her dear friend, Anna Magnani. She herself was from a patrician Umbrian Florentine family, and by 1940, well enough established as a film diva and theater actress that she could defend herself from the sexual pressures that starlets and walk-ons had to submit to in exchange for whatever favor this or that hierarch claimed to provide. That was the very subject of her beach conversation with Anna Magnani, she later recalled. It was June 9th, the day before Italy went to war. They were at Fregene with Dado, a young gay man from their circles. He was teasing them that they must have serviced some hierarch or another to get the fuel ration coupons for their cars. Magnani retorted that he was jealous because the hierarchs only liked to screw women. And she had just finished up saying, well, up to now, we've resisted those hierarchs, those senile fools. When she looked up, here comes one now. What an ass face. It was Triton, as Elsa called him. Fierce white beard, square cut, his face brightened up by blue eyes of monkey-like vivacity. She paused to note his affable, amused smile. What are these lovely nymphs laughing about? The Teruzzi she caricatured asked lasciviously. They giggled as he ogled Magnani's sumptuous bosom. Tits of gold, right, Your Excellency? She neighed with laughter, flashing her long white teeth. Elsa recalled the gossip, the time that Mussolini had ordered him to cut off his beard and he hadn't gone out of the house for 3 days. The child born late in life with an Eastern European Jewish woman, totally spoiled, screaming commands, who looked just like him except for the beard. A wife he had married so long ago that everybody had forgotten. Mussolini's pressure to get him to remarry, his rants against the Vatican for its inaction, But it was this fatalism that had struck her the most. When they pressed him to say something about the war, to denounce it as they believed his old friend Italo Balbo had done, he reacted with an anxious, irritable look, but said nothing.
Wow, thank you so much. So I have many more questions for you, but I see that the time has flown. So I suppose that we should open it up to questions, and if I will ask more myself if there are ones. Well, one quickly here. This is so there are numerous parallels, right, with what happened in Italy under Mussolini and what's going on in many places around the world today, including in the US, in terms of ultra-nationalism, white male supremacy, and racial conflict. So I understand that it's a slippery slope to compare context, but it's also important that we remember our world history and learn from its mistakes. So I know this is a big question, but is there a lesson, any one lesson learned from writing about Teruzzi and his pursuit of perfect fascism that maybe we should pay particular attention to right now?
Well, it's the resonances which I mean, I go at two levels. One is the big picture, post World War I, the whole system is broken. The old parties can't manage to produce what people like Teruzzi need, much less masses who have experienced the war, the pandemic, and so on. And the old parties permit themselves to be crashed by this new power, which attracts men like Teruzzi. So why is that? In this tumult, that the fascist party is able to claim that it's going to provide order by creating immense disorder. And that, I think, is that big context. But then there are all the resonances, the big lies. Teruzzi is incapable of a big lie, and it's fascinating to see him make little lies, which empower those who are making it. But he's not capable. He's, however, great at the cover-up, because he's a man of great reserve. So you can see how a loyalist can be so key to the big guy, to the Duce, because of his loyalty, because of his willing to cover up, because of his willingness to do all the dirty stuff, because of his willingness to try to create a good society by marrying and settling down, having a wife, having children, always wanting his dutifulness, his effort to kind of reproduce the system as fast and as far as he can. So, gosh, big picture.
Yeah, we talk the big lies and pay attention to the lies, but also, as Ruth Ben-Ghiat says all the time, the fascist figure, they're always telling you what they're going to do, and so many of the people just never believe it. But we also should be listening when we're hearing 4, 8, 16 more years, president for life. It's not a joke. It's not just being said, So it's
very
interesting.
hard to clamor. Very, very hard.
So here's a comment from Jill. Thank you. History of that time in the world is fascinating and lots of parallels and things to learn for today's world, she says, which is very true. So Vicki, the other thing that I found just so fascinating and would love to hear more about is this archive that came to you. I mean, it's such serendipity. I mean, it was all through Liliana, right? That this all came to pass. How did you get her papers?
Well, her family, her heirs, were sort of second cousins, once removed, twice removed. The woman was worried that they'd be thrown away. There were 3 or 4 boxes. And so through her son, Rutgers University, where I had taught, they came to me and she asked, are these useful? We want to know why cousin Liliana married this big bird fascist. So looking at these papers, this album, marriage album, these photographs which show Mussolini as the best man, looking at photographs of Cyrenaica and the fascist regime subduing the Arabs of Cyrenaica. What is this going on here? He was governor, George was the governor of Cyrenaica with Liliana as the vice governor, as she called herself. And then reading these extraordinary, or looking at this annulment process, which is secret. That's a church. I was just struck, but I was very interested in the problem of power. So, I was very interested in nailing a fascist. I thought, wow, I'm going to be able to nail the fascist with all this dirt. And so that was a start. There wasn't very much out on him, especially after they separated. And that's where the digging came in. Dig all over Italy, finally tracking down finally his granddaughter, who was very helpful, even though she knew very little in a way, but she provided me with all sorts of insights into his companion and what happened to them. So, the initial.
And not much more about has much been written about Teruzzi?
No, nobody had ever written. I'm always trying to understand why not. And I think in some ways he was so repulsive to a certain kind of anti-fascist one that he was considered by the end a font of corruption, a libertine. My colleague, dear colleague, very distinguished military historian, called him the rutting bull of the empire, because that libertinism was absolutely anathema to the anti-fascists particularly. So there's a kind of an interesting bias that there's a better fascist and a worse fascist. So for coming out of fascism, he would be the bad fascist, whereas the good fascist would be, let's say, Bottai, who was a great intellect and very great lawmaker, but he would also wrote the anti-Jewish laws and said we've got to be really clear on those anti-Jewish laws, make sure they go into effect so we're not throwing Jews out of the school system. Do it before the school starts. So he would be a good fascist. And I think that's it. And not having a wife, he didn't have papers. So that kind of irony is that she had provided the access, and then having to then dig to find him. It was very, very, very difficult. And it'll be a big change because he's not mentioned, even though he occupied very high positions. Great variety of them.
It kind of reminded me, she is the sort of catalyst and the reason why you can tell this incredible story. And it's, again, the woman and her persistence with him and with not allowing him to sort of get the better of her, that then allows this whole story to be told.
Once you take that tack, this is the right tack. Women are everywhere. There's nobody lives without women. The fascist system can't reproduce itself without families. These men are under enormous stress, shall we say, so they can't operate without the complicity of their families, and they're women folks, they're women lovers, they're women advisors, they're women mentors, and this was the case not just of Teruzzi, but also of Mussolini, but all of them. When you start to dig in, you could tell a very different kind of story, very, very different, which is much richer, much human, and in some ways much more horrible too.
Hi, I'm joining you again. Well, this has been such a fascinating discussion. We are at the top of the hour, and great reading, and I loved being able to see the photos that went with it. And thank you both for tuning in from Italy to join us. And again, you can purchase the book at the link that's here on the screen, and I urge you to do so. It's also in our collection at the library if you are local, and in many other libraries, I am sure, if you want to check it out. Is it available as an ebook? I don't
think so yet. I don't think so, but
I know we have a print copy, but yeah, usually we also buy the electronic copy if it's available. We only have the print. So hopefully it'll come out also as an electronic copy. And Jenny, so nice to see you again. And your second time here on our Crowdcast channel, and so nice to meet you, Victoria. And again, thank you both of you for coming out.
So much.
And okay, so we're going to say goodbye for now, and thank you all to our audience for tuning in, and have a great rest of the day Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great audience too.
Yes.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you.